Hello! So, our last unit of 2021. This is a short 2-week poetry unit, and I'd like to do these every so often. So, we'll do a few more poetry units that are usually 2 weeks because it gives you a chance to taste some new skill in poetry and to get a quick collection of some fantastic authors. And that will be true here. I'm calling this unit Facing It because I'm selecting a series of poems that are all about looking into something that is dark, looking into some darkness in the mirror or in history or in a speaker's past. It's about facing hard truths. And I've done that because I think for me, Lord of the Flies, that unit, it's really all about the way that there is a disconnect. There is a lack of facing. There is an inability to face the difficult things. And then in the Joy Luck Club, we see versions of that coming through as well. So we're moving into the spaces where people are forcing critical conversations. And that happened prominently in A Doll's House. And here, a unit about the critical conversations that can happen in poetry. I've clipped this epigraph from The Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. We're not reading that book this year, but if you're looking for good reading, it's great. It's hard and awesome. It's kind of a shorter novella. It's only about 80 pages, dense language though. And it deals with this difficult problem of the speaker where he knows he has been to this darkness. So he says, and this also, said Marlowe suddenly, has been one of the dark places of the earth. I think we all know dark places of our own worlds and of the worlds of people that we've read. So we're going to look at that a little bit. We're going to look specifically in enjambment this week, the way that poetry breaks the line. We've done that before. We're going to do it again because this time I'd like you to do a timed write with that in mind. So we're going to start with The Danger of Silence by Clint Smith. And I've asked you to look at this and watch it. It is an amazing poem, but it's a video poem. It's a slam poem. So I've asked a few questions here in these slides, and I'd just like you to think about them. Bio for Clint Smith. He's a young writer. He's really contemporary right now. He was born in 1988, so he's even younger than me in New Orleans. He's a staff writer for The Atlantic, and he's written for other publications. And he has, this is a little outdated, another book that came out recently in June called How the Word is Passed, and it's all about the physical sites where the slave trade happened. But he writes poetry as well, and poetry that you just saw. And you'll do one more poem by him this week, August 1619. So I ask, why is The Danger of Silence poetry? First of all, it absolutely is. And here are some assertions I'd like to make. Clint moves from prose to poetic form. Where do you think that happens? Where in the poem, for you, does it become a poem and not a speech? How does the content of his message change to move with the form? And that mimetic space where the content of what you're saying changes to mimic the form of what you're saying is always what the poetry analysis centers on. It's always about what does a poem do in its form to mimic what it's saying. Clint Smith is saying that we need to move into silence. He says that there is a deep and dark silence in our lives, and it's at difficult moments, and we need to speak into those moments. He must not hold on to his voice for a later quiet time. He must speak into the silence when the silence creeps in. He says silence is the residue of fear. It is when things freeze in paralysis. In the poem, The Danger of Silence, he moves through the silence, and so he moves through and conquers the fear. The only way out is through. For him, the poem picks up speed, it picks up cadence, and he finds his rhythm as he speaks truths into these dark, silent spaces. So it's a beautiful illustration of how he changes when he starts to find his voice and he moves into a poem. Okay, in its own way, all poems do this, but they have to do this visually. They have to visually capture what moves across the line that moves in the speaker's mind and heart. That is enjambment. So let me tell you a little bit about that. We identify poetry so often by its line breaks. Poetry cares where the line ends. Poetry cares where the stanzas end. Prose does not. I could give you a book like the Joy Luck Club, and you have a printed version and I have an online version. It doesn't matter. The lines break in different places in different versions. We don't care. It's about the story. But if I give you a poem, I had better replicate its line endings perfectly. When I say break, I'm referring to the space around words. I mean the way a sentence stops at the end of a line. That's an end-stopped line. Sort of sounds like what it is. Or the way a sentence continues through onto the next line, and that is called enjambment. All right, so let's look at some examples of that. I'm going to do this with a sample poem that's not one I asked you to read so that you can see it. It's called Plants by Stuart Deichel, and I'll show you why I love this for enjambment. All right, so this is a poem I like by a modern writer, and he really plays with line endings all the way through. It's a poem about a speaker, a girl, who really has big ideas for where she wants to go in life. And it ends with this wonderful couplet that I love, where it says, picture what you wish to become if you wish to become that picture. The whole poem is about rejecting superficiality and rejecting the idea of an image as what you're seeking in your life, rather than the thing itself. Does she, the speaker, care more about how she appears to herself and to other people, or does she want to live the life that's within that appearance? He has this great moment where she is beginning to look into what that appearance could be. And it says she plans to love her apartment where she will keep, new line, just one flower in a blue vase. So that little enjambment here. What will she keep? What will be most precious to her? We don't know. There's a bit of surprise. And the next line we find out, just one flower in a blue vase. It's really about a beautiful reductionist, minimalist image that she's created in her mind of what this apartment will look like. And then it says, she already loves the word apart, and then new line, mint. He enjambs the word. I love that. You don't see that a lot. And I think he does it in a really clever way. So she, the speaker, is obsessed with the small, visible things, the word apartment, and the way it can break like that. Whose halves please her when she sees them breaking in jam, the line in her journal. So this is a little snippet in a poem about enjambment, the way the lines break across the line, or across the sentences break across the line. So simple definition, enjambment is when a line usually breaks halfway. The thought is not complete, so it continues on to the next. And we see that again and again here. An example of an end-stopped line is here in the catacombs period. So here the line ends, and that's an end-stopped line. All right, so that's the definition, and now application. Breaks are about pace. For Mary Oliver, she says a break in space, like an enjambment, or a break across stanzas. It reveals either a hesitation, the stanza or line ends with a stop where it's asking the reader to pause, or it's an acceleration. It does not stop, it moves to the next piece and is a quickening. Either way, it's emphasis of some kind. So you're meant to discover why that might be and make some creative insights about what's at work with the visibility of the space. I'm going to do this with there's a certain slant of light, which is a poem I'm asking you to read this week. Short poem. And I'm going to demonstrate what I think is going on with the enjambment. I'm asking myself this question: where does it stop and where does it pick up speed? And then, of course, why is that? And your creative analysis question is the same, but applied to August 1619. All right, so Dickinson. This is the first Dickinson poem we've done, and she's just an extraordinary poet. She has a number of poems just like this that are really heavy on irregular use of capitalization, on the use of dashes. You'll see lots of them. So she's always interested in punctuation as an aid to meaning. You've read the poem, or if you haven't, do read the poem and then come back to this analysis. I'm going to stay really tight with the first stanza in trying to understand what she's doing here. So she writes, "There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses, like the heft of cathedral tunes. Here's the enjambment right here, from heft to of. The other lines are end stopped, so there's an end here to the phrase, and this is an end to the phrase as well. But this is enjambed. So I'm going to lift that over to my analysis. Okay, so you could pause it and read it. The next thing that we do is I ask you to apply this to August 1619, but I will read it and explain a little of what I'm thinking. Here first, the notation of the poetry line ending, it's indicated by a slash. So I have oppresses like the heft slash of cathedral tunes, and that's how you too should write or quote poems in your own prose. Always use that slash to indicate this is where the line would end. All right, so I'm just talking about this first stanza. I notice there's something weird going on there with that enjambment. The speed, the enjambment, calls attention to the surprise. Songs floating through a church are meant to be sacred, holy, but the hymns that she recalls are oppressive and confining. The light that filters in the window on a winter afternoon, it could be a source of peace and life. The poem seems to start in this very ethereal, beautiful way, but it's not. Instead, for Dickinson, it carries the look of death. There's something sinister, something dark, something distant, lurking in those beams of sharp light. Songs are not always peaceful, and indeed light can cut and constrict. In the same unexpected way, the poem cuts at the heft. It shows how the space of a cathedral can also constrict. What is meant to be pure and religious is not always so, and simply to be in a sacred space does not guarantee any sort of peace or joy. Religion itself does not free us. Something within it may, but Dickinson does not lead us there. The poem is pretty dark throughout. All right, so that's your task, right? But yours is with August 1619. It's a pretty short poem. It's done in tercets and 3-line stanzas. And I'm wondering what the enjambment or stanza breaks. You can think about how the lines enjam across a stanza. Slow or speed the message. Why, of course, is always the question. Right.